Well, I guess to me it's something like that. ¿Qué tal? Buenas tardes, esperamos unos minutos más, así el público puede ingresar y después damos comienzo a una nueva sección de la cátedra Lord Acton. Okay. Bueno, voy a hacer la introducción en español y después te paso la palabra, Alex. Bueno, nuevamente gracias por estar hoy aquí. Hoy es la última sesión de nuestro año de la Cátedra Lord Acton, la cual seguirá durante el primer semestre del próximo año. Bueno, como ustedes saben, la cátedra, como se hace ya un par de años, con el Acton Institute USA, Ale ya fue quien va a ser de chairman de la sesión de hoy, como lo ha sido en las sesiones anteriores. Acton USA elige, determina, sugiere quiénes son los expositores y nosotros tenemos el privilegio de escucharlos aquí en UCEMA. Así que muchas gracias, Alex, muchas gracias a los expositores y no te saco más tiempo.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Edgardo. Un par de oraciones en español y después voy al inglés. De vuelta, la misión de Acton es muy similar a la del UCEMA. Tratamos de trabajar por una sociedad libre, virtuosa y próspera, pero nos tratamos de basar en la mejor ciencia social. En que no nos escondemos de la realidad y nos encanta que la Universidad del UCEMA ha mantenido esa tradición. Así que gracias por acompañarnos y me muevo al inglés. Just introduce that Acton shares with UCEMA this vision and mission of working with academic excellence. We are rooted in a vision of the human person, which we think is the truth vision. But we try to nurture our work with the best possible social science. And has an immense privilege. This is like our second year of having this chair with UCEMA, the University of Macroeconomic Studies of Argentina, and having two of my favorite intellectuals, Tim Carney at the American Enterprise Institute, that is one of the oldest think tanks in the United States, who has been focusing on this topic, of the dangers of having businesses sometimes collude with government to get special privilege. Some use their work to try to prevent being harassed by government, but it's a very tricky topic. It's not black and white. And then Michael Miller, my colleague at Acton Institute, will be making some comments and questions. So what an immense privilege is to have with us Tim Carney of the American Enterprise Institute, speaking about this connection between business, the economy, and the free society. Tim, thank you so much for being with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and be able to join you guys. And this is one of my favorite topics. It's rough when you're a journalist or a scholar who works on things like corruption or crony capitalism, or my other area of subject is sort of the collapse of communities. So especially with crony capitalism, when I see bad developments, I get all excited. And I sometimes say, oh my gosh, I love this story, when it's something totally corrupt. So I don't have that much happy to share with you guys, but what I'm hoping is at the end, we can, find some notes of hope. So I'm a believer in free enterprise, and I believe that the single biggest threat to free enterprise is not Bernie Sanders. It's not, in America, at least in the US, it's not socialists. And in the US, which is the center of world capitalism, the biggest threat is the big business lobby. So I'm going to, if you don't mind, share my screen here. It's not my belief alone, that the biggest threat to free enterprise is the big business lobby. It's also Milton Friedman. The two greatest enemies of free enterprise in the United States have been my fellow intellectuals on the one hand and the business corporations of this country. And what Friedman said was that nobody stands to benefit as much from special carve-outs, from subsidies, from regulations, from a complex tax code with high tax rates than the big business lobby. But why? They're not the only enemies. Why are they the greatest enemies? Well, three main reasons. One, big business tends to win. Here in the US Senate, Bernie Sanders does not get his way that much. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez does not get her way that much. But General Electric or Boeing or Uber or Facebook are much more likely to win. Every time you see the government get bigger, I always tell people in Washington, look to see which special interest is getting rich off of it. The number two reason why big business is the greatest threat to free enterprise, they fool the media, they fool the left, they fool the middle. Number three, big business fools the right. That is, it fools the free market people, the classical liberals in elected office say, well, I believe in free enterprise, but in this case, business is saying they want intervention. People who think they're pro-free enterprise become pro-business and then become pro-government. There's a fourth reason that I'll get to at the end. That's the most important. It's the moral reason. But let's just start going through some of the cases in the US over the last 2 or 3 presidential administrations. The Republican Party, when it's expanded government, has almost always done it with hand in hand with big government, with big business. In 2003, they expanded Medicare to cover prescription drugs. This was done not just hand in hand with the drug companies that wanted more subsidies, but while Democrats wanted to cover the prescription drugs through Medicare, Republicans in Congress roped in the insurance companies. So it was sort of a great example of how bipartisanship works here in Washington, where you have the big government that the left demands together with a profit-taking middleman, the insurance companies that the Republicans demand. The bailouts in 2008 of Wall Street and the automakers, these were where George W. Bush said he had to abandon his free enterprise beliefs to save the market. These were both obviously done hand in hand with the big businesses benefiting. Just a general overspending that happens whenever Republicans are in control is very typically for the benefit of government contractors or other businesses that want money sent their way. Donald Trump's protectionism, whether it's his trade wars or ultimately him backing down from getting rid of the Jones Act, a protectionist shipping policy, it was always because there was a big business had his ear and said, well, in this case, we want the government to intervene. While we want tax cuts in one way, we want tariffs on the other hand. The Export-Import Bank is one of my favorite government agencies to beat up on here in the US. It subsidizes US exports and the banks that finance them. And Donald Trump ran against the Export-Import Bank. And then by the time he got into office, it was the banks and Boeing, the biggest beneficiary, who pushed him to expand the Export-Import Bank and extend it for 7 years, which is a really long time for an agency like that to be extended. But probably my favorite story, and again, when I say favorite, that means it's bad. Probably my favorite story of this is about the light bulb law that Republicans passed, George W. Bush signed, and then Barack Obama expanded. Because if you go back in time a little bit, it tells a very interesting story about how capitalism works compared to sort of the socialist critique of it. This was in the 1990s in the United States. General Electric sold half of the light bulbs that were sold in American homes. Sylvania and Philips sold most of the rest. In different countries, the market share looked different, but these 3 companies dominated the light bulb market. This, in fact, is a beauty of capitalism. These companies would complain about the razor-thin profit margins on light bulbs. The downside of selling a ubiquitous commodity, the profit on a bulb that sells less than a quarter is negligible. So they were making a bulb for about 24 cents and selling it for about 25 cents. This is the beauty of capitalism. Big profits is not the beauty of capitalism. These tiny profits, because you know what? If GE and Sylvania had gotten together and been able to raise prices, Walmart would have gone ahead and said, hey, somebody else supply the light bulbs for 26 cents and I'll sell them. So small profits is why we like capitalism. And there were so many efforts to get Americans off of these cheap light bulbs. Consumers need to be educated that new bulb lines help reduce energy consumption. So we had these massive clunky bulbs, if you remember, back in the 90s. The New York Times in 2011 lamented that no amount of subsidy or green branding has managed to woo consumers from Edison's bulb. So some years ago, Philips formed a coalition with environmental groups, including the Natural Resources Defense Council, to push for higher standards. What does standards mean? Well, standards means regulations. So who was behind the regulations? Well, the light bulb makers and Republicans in Congress. That's Fred Upton. He's a Republican member from Michigan who was the chairman of the Commerce Committee. And he praised the bill. This common sense, bipartisan approach partners with American industry to save energy, yada, yada. And he said, we didn't just pick a standard out of the air. We worked with industry and environmental groups to come up with a standard. So some of you who've been following Facebook recently have noticed this line. Facebook appears before Congress and people say, why won't you be regulated? And Mark Zuckerberg will say, I'll be regulated. And then Lindsey Graham, a Republican senator, will say, well, can you tell us what regulations would be good? And Zuckerberg says, yes, thank you very much. So this is how you get Republicans on board with big burdensome regulations that kill competition, is by they say, well, this can't be anti-business. This has to be pro-free market because the big guys like it. Another example of this during the same debate, Dennis Hastert had just lost the speakership, but was still in Congress. They had him testify. And he testified about Polybright International, a light bulb maker. These are 100% green. Then Denny Hastert, weeks later, left Congress before his term was up. And you can guess what he did. This is a lobbying registration. Hastert became a lobbyist for the very company whose bulb he had been selling as a member of Congress weeks before. So that's how you get Republicans on board, but also the media, that when they do try to get both sides, sometimes the only sides they look at are the liberals who want the progressives who want more regulation, and industry. And so when industry is on board with a regulation, they say, well, everybody's on board. Even industry supported the light bulb ban, the Washington Post fact checker said. And they said, we don't see how higher efficiency standards translates into a ban on the old light bulbs, especially when light manufacturers have embraced the new standards. Again, the standards meant it was illegal to sell the old light bulbs. Not that they were even subsidizing the new light bulbs. It was illegal to manufacture for sale or to import the old light bulbs. And the reason that these standards were written was because the big guys had written them. GE, Sylvania, them. I'll quickly list off other examples, but I like to get to the discussion. But Obamacare only passed because the drug makers, the hospitals, and the insurers supported it. Yet this somehow fooled everybody. When there was Supreme Court cases, journalists said, if Supreme Court cases trying to overturn Obamacare years later, journalists said, if getting rid of Obamacare is such a good idea, why isn't corporate America getting behind King v. Burwell? Well, because corporate America helped write and defend Obamacare from the beginning. Barack Obama admitted as much in 2009. When you've got doctors, nurses, hospitals, AARP, the American Association of Retired Persons, and even the drug companies, as well as major employers like Walmart, saying now is a time for us to bring about some change. I think it's time to bring about some change. So even the companies that are going to further entrench their monopoly and get a pipeline of taxpayer dollars and crowd out their smaller competitions, even they're on board. This must be good. The drug makers, of course, supported Obamacare. That is Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts. That's the biggest insurer in Massachusetts, defended the law in the Supreme Court. And you just go on down the line. it's part of a term I call regulatory robbery. And what it is companies using regulation either to just get cash flowing into their pockets or to crowd out competition. I think one of the best examples of this was Alcoa, the aluminum company of America, pushed again and again to heighten our fuel efficiency standards. The regulation saying car makers have to make their cars meet this fuel efficiency. Well, replacing steel parts in a car with aluminum makes them lighter. Now, environmentally, is that better? Maybe not, because the manufacturing of the aluminum parts is incredibly energy intensive and greenhouse gas intensive compared to the steel. But the manufacturing is done in Australia or in China or in another country, while the emissions are coming out of the tailpipe in the US. And so this counts as an environmental gain by our regulations. But really, the only big winner from this is the aluminum industry. So that's where you see the company that's getting rich off of it undermining the stated purpose of it. But they're also the ones who are actively pushing for it. And there were people, lobbyists, going back and forth between Alcoa and the Obama administration. And one of the most damaging things is erecting barriers to entry and protecting the big guys. The CEO of Goldman Sachs said that the post-financial collapse, financial reform, quote, "we will be among the biggest beneficiaries." Years later, he said, "more intense regulatory and technological requirements have raised the barriers to entry higher than at any time in modern history." This was Lloyd Blankfein, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, saying, this is why this is a good bill for Goldman Sachs. Kennedy School of Government did a study and found that the entry of new banks and the persistence of small banks was greatly harmed by this bill. Quote, "Dodd-Frank created a too small to succeed problem, in addition to a too big to fail problem." Keeping out options, new rules make it more expensive and tend to make it tougher for small players to enter the market, effectively widening JP Morgan's moat. Again, that's not a quote by me, that's a quote by Jamie Dimon telling shareholders why this law was good for JP Morgan. And back to Obamacare, some of the architects of this said the economic forces put in motion by Obamacare are likely to lead to vertical organization of providers and accelerate physicians' employment by hospitals and aggregation into large physician groups. That is, doctors are going to have to go to work for big hospitals. Big hospitals are going to buy small hospitals. That was part of what the stated purpose of Obamacare was, because centralizing the industries makes an industry sort of more comprehensible and more accessible for government, as well as just being a side effect of regulation. So this is the US from 1978 to 2015. The blue line is the number of new companies entering the economy. The green line is the number of companies exiting the economy. You can see a stagnation in the US over the last 40 years. What does it do when regulation and subsidy and tax complexity freeze the economy in place? It means higher prices. It also really importantly means lower wages. Economists say the labor share of profit goes down. More profit sits with the big businesses. And of course, we all suffer from less innovation because there's less competitive pressure. So that's regulation. Corporate welfare, there's all sorts of it. I mentioned the Export-Import Bank. In the US, we have a sugar program where we keep out foreign sugar in order to subsidize the Florida sugar market, and up in Minnesota, sugar beets. That, of course, drives up the price of sugar, drives people to use corn syrup, which is arguably less healthy than plain sugar. The ethanol mandate, we have to put grain alcohol in our gas tanks against our will. And of course, the corn farmers and the ethanol producers support that. And increasingly what we're seeing is green energy subsidies for the likes of electric car makers or bioenergy users or that sort of thing. All of these things, big government programs that get passed for the benefit of and by the lobbying of big business. Final quick note. This is my Pope. I'm a Catholic. No Catholic popes have been like rah-rah free market types, right? He has been the harshest on capitalism, on what he calls globalism. I think with all due respect, that some of his understanding of capitalism is more of an understanding of a type of capitalism that's practiced in Argentina, which has more to do with connections and government power than it does with competition and free enterprise. I might be totally wrong. The reason I'm bringing that up here is I'm hoping there are lots of people who have thoughts and impressions, but that's been my impression reading the commentary of various Holy Fathers, including Papa Francesco. Again, Argentina ranked number 149 on economic freedom by the Heritage Foundation, just below Dominica. So I promise a fourth reason, and this is where we will wrap up. Again, I'm a Catholic. I don't believe that the pursuit of profit is in itself a moral good. The pursuit of profit is good as a means to another end. As earlier popes have said, markets are tools of men and they're there to serve a higher good. And in the context of free and open competition, the pursuit of profit serves many, many goods, which is, as I said, it drives down prices and makes things more affordable. It increases competition, increases innovation, and lifts up the human state. Competition also drives up wages if you have multiple employers competing over workers. It drives up a demand for quality and honesty. I believe that in free and open competition, the pursuit of profit generates virtues. But outside the context of free and open competition, the pursuit of profit does not serve those goods. It often promotes vices. It promotes cronyism. It promotes sort of clever gaming of the system. It promotes trying to be anti-competitive. And so in that context, the more that any government, more that any economy moves away from free and open competition, the more it undermines the pursuit of profit. And so then if I'm in a debate with Bernie Sanders, socialist member of the US Senate, and he says, what are the goods of capitalism? And I tell him, and he will say, but General Electric isn't competing with anybody. They're getting these giant government contracts. The ethanol makers aren't selling something you want. They're selling something you have to buy. The insurers are forcing us to buy their insurance through Obamacare, and the drug makers are outlawing competition for far, far longer than is necessary. So where are the goods? I lose that debate the more that we are in crony capitalism, because frankly, I can't morally defend the pursuit of profit if it's not done in the context of free and open competition. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tim. And now you, my friends, know why we like Tim, and hope this presentation is used for courses. As Tim brought the Argentinian case and the Argentinian Pope, and as know that Michael Miller has heard me speak about this. Cardinal Bergoglio never liked much economics. Now his father was an accountant and many times had to be absorbed with the demands of the accounting season. And one of his brothers was a great entrepreneur, small business entrepreneur, but he never understood that. But unfortunately, what Tim said is right, but it's not only, it takes two to tango, Tim, we say in Argentina. While he was the head bishop in Buenos Aires, we had three jewels of world capitalism: IBM from the United States, Siemens from Germany, and Skanska, from this impeccable Scandinavia. All three, Tim, were involved in major corruption schemes, through third parties. Skanska, a beloved friend of the Pope and of mine, Esteban Bullrich, who's sick now, he was the courageous senator, and perhaps he was congressman who brought up the case of Skanska corruption. So again, we laugh at these things, but when the enemies of the free societies see this, and they don't see many people like you, Tim, speaking so openly about some of these issues, it's very damaging for our cause of defend the moral superiority of the free economy. And you brought, the expansion of Medicare in the United States. It was done almost with Latin American standards, with President Bush, in late hours of the day, buying votes. And I was interviewed, Edgardo, Zablosky, and Matias, and Argentinians by La Nación after the so-called Affordable Care Act of Obama. And I have a son who would never want to rely on the government, who his insurance premium was tripled, after this Affordable Care Act passed. And then I did the accounting. I see what my friends thought that the increase in government spending was going to be caused by Affordable Care Act, and it was almost exactly the same as the increase in the value of the stock of health insurance companies. And like you, I'm totally favorable to a free economy. But the free economy is what you have described, when we all have to play by the same rules, not where the guys who has more backs and more access get privileged rules. So I spoke too much as a moderator. I want my friend and colleague, much admired, Michael Miller. Can you jump in and share your thoughts, Michael, about this important topic that we are discussing today?
Following Tim Carney, Tim and I were at a conference a couple months ago, and that time I got to go first. I'm always going first. Really not much time. Tim's points are so very important. And I think he makes a couple.
Michael, your microphone's muffled a little bit.
Is it muffled?
Slightly.
I'm not sure why, because I should be straight into this. Is it better now? A little better? Okay. So tell me if I'm unclear. I think a couple of thoughts. I think Tim brings out an important point, that a lot of conservatives and free marketers have just not taken seriously enough the reality of crony capitalism. I think there's many reasons for that. One of them is it's almost a reaction to leftist critique of corporations. So Augusto Del Noce, the Italian philosopher, made this point that in the 60s revolution, there was a large kind of 68 revolution. There was a large sense where tradition was bad and technology was bad. Okay, now that's not exactly true, because there was this kind of commune plus techno-utopianism that really influenced Silicon Valley. And that's actually a big issue that I think we need to address, that maybe outside on another event. But there was this sense of anti-tradition and anti-tech and anti-industry. And conservatives, in reaction to that, sensibly went, pro-tradition. That's a very conservative thing to do, but actually bought into certain elements of kind of the military industrial crony capitalist idea of big government, big business in collusion with each other as a reaction to the left. And so, and I think and Tim brought this up, but that the right was fooled. We were in a sense duped. In defending business, we thought we were defending a free, competitive market economy. Obviously, not everybody thinks that, but I think that was a weakness in the right. So Alex brings up this story. I was at the Heritage Foundation, and a man said to Alex, "Come on, what's wrong with your socialist Pope? He doesn't understand capitalism." And of course, what Alex just explained to us, he said, no, he does. He understands crony capitalism very well. What he doesn't understand is a free, competitive market economy. So I think that's in a sense, reaction to the left has caused us, I think, to be a bit blind. And I think so. Tim's points are very important. I also think that plays out in Latin America. I've only been to Argentina once, so I wouldn't get extra credit. But I did live in Latin America. And one of the things you see is big families in collusion with the government, and they're the liberal party. So the liberal party are crony capitalists with special privileges. And then the poor are excluded. They're excluded from private property, from rule of law, from participation in the economy, from registering their business, from justice in the courts. And so the poor in a lot of Latin American countries experience the left as cronyist and then they experience the right as cronyism. And I think we've failed in a lot of quote unquote liberals to actually open up the economy for the poor. And then just a couple of other thoughts. Joel Salatin, who's a farmer in the United States, he runs some organic farms. I've had the chance to visit his farm and interview him a couple times. And he wrote a great book called Everything I Want to Do is Illegal. It's a fantastic book. And he's a small, medium-sized super entrepreneur, very efficient. The average, let me give you some agriculture here. The average cow days per acre in Augusta County, Virginia, where he is, are 80 cow days per acre. Salatin gets 400. The average income per acre is 1,000. Salatin makes 3,000. He's a super entrepreneur, very efficient. But his biggest struggles are against large agribusiness that create layers of regulation that Tim talked about that make it hard for small businesses and small farmers to compete. And I think that the Republican Party has basically been the party of pro-business instead of being the party of pro-competitive market economies. And I think one other example, I directed a film for Acton called Poverty Inc. And in the film, we talk about agricultural subsidies. So we subsidize our agriculture in the United States. We overproduce. We put high tariffs because we're free marketers. So we put high tariffs to prevent poor countries, developing countries, to export to us, because we obviously love to promote comparative advantage, but when it comes down to whether we are actually going to do it or not, we put up the tariffs. Then we either dump it, that is our subsidized food, in poor countries, or we graciously give it as foreign aid. And we destroy local farms, and we destroy local business, and then we wonder why there's hostility towards capitalism. Well, one of the answers, oh my goodness, the free market has destroyed this. We need more regulation. Just in 2020, for example, Facebook spent $19.68 million on lobbying. Okay, and I think we have to be clear about the reasons why people don't support market economies is because free marketers, and I include myself as a supporter of free competitive markets, and also have failed sufficiently to call out the cronyism that Tim does, because sometimes they're supporting our organization, sometimes they're giving us money, they're our friends, they're not the left. Well, oftentimes they actually are the left. And we're finding in the United States, for example, an alliance between leftist politicians and leftist corporations to impose left-wing secularist policies on the American people. And I think I think Tim's work is just super important for that. The last quick comments I'll make is, one is, I actually think it's relevant to a larger civilizational crisis that we're having. And that's this: we think very short term. And so when Tim gave those examples of Jamie Dimon, right, or the Goldman Sachs, it's beneficial for us, right? And everybody says, yeah. No one's thinking generationally, right? And so let me be very provocative. But there's just a study, a report that came out that I think like something, and I could be wrong on the numbers, so I'm happy to be corrected. Like 14% of Generation Z are declaring themselves to be some type of LGBTQ. Well, what is that? The failure of adults to walk vulnerable teenagers through the normal vicissitudes of their teenage life, to help them be ordered and understand what they really desire is marriage and a family, to live in a community, etc. And that, they've been propagandized and groomed, and some people have been abused. And what do adults do? Instead of walking them through this and guiding them like we're supposed to, adults have used them as political tools or for their own disordered sexual gratification. So young people are being used as political tools because there's this deep breakdown of any intergenerational thinking. And I think crony capitalism, I would agree with him, is a moral failing. It's a civilizational failing for short-term profit with no concern for future generations or for future innovation or future businesses. So I would argue one of the social responsibilities of business is to avoid crony capitalism so as to allow low barriers to entry so that competition and innovation can actually benefit people generationally. So, I mean, those are just my responses. I do have one kind of, may I ask one, so that's my like mutual admiration society with Tim Carney. Can I ask one question that I think some national conservatives might ask you?
Please.
So, I mean, obviously, I'm sympathetic to everything you said, right? How would you respond to this? Some NatCons would say, look, you guys, you know, this is like American conservatives or other national conservatives, you know, who support a protected economy, say, you guys are living in fantasy land. There's no such thing as a free competitive market economy. There's always going to be cronyism. We need to direct the economy to conservative ends. We need to protect American businesses that protect the American military. And this is for the American side, but you could say the same thing for Argentina, for anywhere. You need to protect, like the Swiss protect their agriculture, the Japanese protect their agriculture and rice. Americans need to stop this neoliberal fantasy of free markets and actually protect American workers. And if that costs us more money in the short run, the long run benefit to society and to the community thinks how would you respond to that critique?
I mean, I think it's a fair critique, especially if you realize that a lot of what you were referring to were some non-economic goods that we want to protect. So the first half I would say is often we do need to sacrifice economic goods for other goods. We want to, the simplest case is we want to make our bombs and fighter jets here rather than in China, right? It might be cheaper to do it. Just the existence of our military, right, is bad for the economy. The existence of the US military takes resources away from other things. We need to have that. Some of what you and I were talking about in Indianapolis was the collapse of community, and you can definitely make a case that the closure of the factories had a much bigger harmful effect than economists would have assumed. And so I would say, all right, we can start from the premise that you might want to protect a non-economic good at which is going to be higher than an economic good. And you're going to pay an economic cost, more expensive goods made in a factory, because preserving a community is more valuable. That's the first hurdle you have to clear. The second hurdle you have to clear is how will you make sure that this is not done in a totally corrupt way that just serves the insiders and hurts the rest of us? A lot of what my friends who have the same criticisms of big tech that I do propose is, well, the government passed some regulation that keeps big tech from, you know, kicking off a conservative, and that's going to end up the wrong way. If it's a culture war, the left is going to win. If you're protecting factories, I think that you're going to be sadly disappointed that the factories are going to end up with a bunch of robots in them. Yeah, they'll still be in Pittsburgh, but they'll be run by robots rather than sort of the working man. So sort of my libertarianism on some of these arguments is a conservatism, is a understanding our fallen nature, the corrupt nature of our politics, and that the best laid plans of government are going to go awry. That doesn't argue against any government intervention for a social good at an economic cost, but it sets a much, much higher threshold for it. And there are debates I would have. And one of the things I would say about cultural changes is some people say, let's subsidize having more babies, like a lot of countries do. I would say, unless you change the culture with your government policy, you're not going to bring about any of these other goods. Just putting a higher tax on steel, I don't think would have kept sort of Pittsburgh the way it was and prevented the cultural harm. So it's not an illegitimate argument. I think they underestimate the hurdles they have to clear to have it actually accomplish their goal. And my pessimism from watching this up close for 20 years is that the protection they put in place to protect the working guy in Pittsburgh is really going to protect somebody else with better political connections.
Thank you so much, Tim and Michael. There is a question, you answered one of them, but while you think about both are, one is mine and it's difficult, ties the work of both of you, but one is about examples of this business lobby and crony capitalism in this area of environment, climate change. As you know, there is almost a cancel culture in Wall Street that you have to go now with new social indicators, ESG, environment, social, and government indicators. For me, moving to that will create enormous incentives for corruption and cronyism. But again, it's while you think of, any of you have an idea of some examples of this business lobby on the environment. The other question is your expertise, your other passion, Tim, which is the work of communities. And again, at Acton in the United States, we work with the great Abrahamic traditions, with Friends of the Jewish Faith, the Protestant faith, Muslims, Friends of Freedom, as well as Catholic. Again, I invited you as an expert. I'm welcome. I'm also joined the Catholic faith when I graduated from the university. So, but this work of communities, many people agree with your diagnostics, but how can we better organize our nonprofit work, our voluntary work, to be more effective in this effort, of exposing what we think is an enemy of the free society with not creating bigger dangers? Again, I have more questions than answers, but I don't know if you have any idea on this, Tim. How can we improve our work? And you also, Michael.
Yep. I'll start on the environmental stuff. So the first thing I would say is one of the best arguments that are ever made for government intervention in the economy is if costs are externalized. And so you can see lots of this in the environment. If GE, to use a real life example, is dumping mercury into the Hudson River, it's hard for the market purely to address that. And it might be easier and more straightforward for the government to step in and make them do that. In the US, we mostly did it through litigation, actually. Not sure that that's better than regulation. So on climate, to the degree that we determine that greenhouse gas emissions are an externalized cost, my study on crony capitalism leads me to believe that the only good approach is the simplest, most straightforward, most direct attack on it. Rather than subsidize Tesla and give a cap and trade system where you're handing out credits, there were credits given if you planted Monsanto seeds in one of these bills that didn't pass Congress. Just try to, as directly as possible, put a cost on it. So a carbon tax would be a much more straightforward way to address this. And the simpler it is, the less it is subject to being gamed. So for my worry about cronyism, what I would say is if you are going to regulate do stuff in the name of climate, make it as simple and as straightforward as possible. Because instead what you see, we had Enron, if you guys remember Enron from 20 years ago, lobbying for the Kyoto Protocol because one of the reasons was they were burning coal-fired power plants. They were running coal-fired power plants in Asia and South America and Africa. And it would drive down the price of coal if the US stopped burning it. So they wanted to burn more coal. So they wanted this environmental regulation. I gave the example on Alcoa. There's all sorts of these things. Famously, Barack Obama's stimulus gave money to Solyndra, this totally failed solar power maker. And those sort of picking winners and losers are going to have either the sort of stupidity problem, which is what I think Solyndra was, or the cronyism problem, which is what you get in these other cases. And the simpler you make the regulation, the less likely it is to being gamed. I don't know if Michael?
Well, I have I think that's right. I like the way you articulate that. Tell me how you would react to this. I think the mic's fixed now. I'm sorry.
Yes.
I figured out what happened. There was a Bluetooth somewhere that it connected to it, going back and forth. Technology will be out to get you. So I apologize for that before. In one sense, I've said this before, tell me if you think this is wrong, because maybe it is. But, you talk about also in a sense, like how the right was duped. And what you'll see is, for example, the right gets really worked up about Solyndra and how terrible it is, but really thinks Elon Musk is the greatest entrepreneur ever, when in fact, Tesla was getting incredible amount of subsidies. How do you do you think that's a fair characterization of what's going on? And then how would you say that we in a sense, what are some you gave some policy ideas? Are there any rhetorical things we need to do in a sense to open the mind on this area? In addition to what you're doing, I mean, what works for you to get people to make this connection and realize, I realize that crony capitalism is really harmful to the poor. And I think we could get both the left and the right to see this in a way where you could create a real coalition to get those simple policies. Maybe I'm wrong. What do you think about that? How do you react?
So one thing is, here in the US, I point out that, and this wasn't true 30 years ago, but something like 9 of the 10 wealthiest counties in America are within commuting distance of the US Capitol. That should not be the case. And that offends Americans who think that this sounds like Russia, or that it sounds like China, where your connections and proximity to government power indicate your success. Other ideas that I think are, so when government gets bigger, some big business gets rich, is counterintuitive, right? But when government increases its control over an industry, whoever hires the best lobbyists will do the best. And that is never mom and pop. That is never the small business. I think that is a more intuitive way to talk about it. Or government is a home game for big business, is a sporting event term that I put it. And then sort of relentlessly report on how these stories, on who's behind a given subsidy or a handout. And it's not going to be done by a lot of the the mainstream media, when they'll say, oh, well, even the light bulb guys support it, to slowly and methodically explain it. Now, me saying more journalism is the key to fighting this is obviously me being a crony and talking my own book and talking about the need for more reporting. But I do think there are ways to put it that can be more intuitive. And again, that people see that the Beltway, the capital region around DC is sucking in wealth. And I haven't seen what was that show, The Hunger Games, or read those books, but I think that has very wealthy capital and very poor provinces. That's increasingly perceived by the working class in middle America, which explains Trump's victory, to get it perceived by and I think the shift in the Hispanic vote in the US shows that perception that the game is rigged and government is doing the rigging, that those are ideas that with enough examples and repetition can really become intuitive.
Yeah, just a quick thing. I remember several years ago, I was in DC, and all of a sudden I got angry, I felt angry as this is not a normal thing for me, like, oh, good, people are doing well. I'm kind of happy when people make money. And like, you see that people are making money, and you see somebody has a beautiful house or a nice car, and you think, good, that's awesome. It's great. But for the first time, it was almost like am I feeling envious? Like, what is it? And I was angry because I thought there should not be this much money here. I mean, it just really, it was palpable how much it struck me. I have a question for Alex. Do you think, Alex, you have spent many years, think tanks better than anybody else, you write in Forbes for think tanks. Do you think A, free market think tanks have failed in this area? And B, if yes or no, or what they have done, and what can, in addition to journalism, some of the generally free market or conservative think tanks do to improve their work on this? Because I think that's a critique, actually, of free market think tanks. You guys are just in the pockets. Even if it's not true, you're in the pockets of business, or at least ideologically in the pockets of business, if not necessarily being funded by them. How would you respond to that, Alex? What do you think needs to be done in that area?
Oh, well, I'm one of the speakers, but yes, I think I did the first study correlation corruption and economic freedom in the mid-90s with Eugenio Guzman, freshly graduated from the London School of Economics. And finally, we had some measurements, and I'm a trustee, have been a trustee since the early 90s. Now it's 30 years of the Fraser Institute, where our motto is, if it matters, measure it. And here we have been speaking about a topic, Tim, Michael, where we have very few measurements. We started measure corruption with the proxy of transparency and with questionnaires of perceptions of corruption. There are volumes, thousands of pages of rules of how to combat corruption. One of my sons was heavily involved in this in one of the major labor firms working in compliance. But firms, corporations, and big business have mastered the art with the lawyers, spending, again, billions, perhaps trillions of dollars in compliance to work in the area of quasi-corruption. I think that you're working within the law that is made, as you were describing, the same culprits are helping frame the law. So the way you frame the question, first, yes, for sure, Michael, I think we have failed. We see this growing, and we continue to do the same thing, and no one is raising an alarm. I can be very transparent. This, as I was involved in the efforts to measure economic freedom, I tried to use the same method. When people told us, "Oh, it cannot be measured," and now we have competed in this. I try to do the same with crony capitalism, but it frightens everyone, because we each nonprofit, and I really congratulate the American Enterprise Institute for having Tim Carney. They get support from crony capitalism, and they do not only accept the grants from crony capitalists, they sometimes give them awards. I'm not afraid here to mention names, because Mexico is one of the worst countries in the hands of crony capitalists. But one of them, Ricardo Salinas Pliego, was $1 billion non-competing contract to handle almost $1 billion of social security payments. But he's courted by all my most of my free market friends. So we look at the other side, sometimes with the excuse, oh, the other side do it, or everyone has to be a crony capitalist. This is the world we live in. But this is very bad. This is very sad. So again, I think I answered my question, how to move forward. Again, I seek your help. We are starting with a great group of researchers, econometricians, and scientists at the Universidad Francisco Marroquín with the Institute Faith and Liberty to redo the studies of of corruption and economic freedom, but incorporating this issue of quasi-corruption. And again, donors don't want, as Tim knows, some of our people who regard capitalism as a sacrament don't want us even to use the word crony capitalism. They use the word corporate welfare. But corporate welfare is different. It's a welfare system that is applied to all. Everyone can compete. Cronyism, like business lobbies, Tim, you can say that sometimes corporations that are unfairly damaged by government regulation create a lobby to protect themselves. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Microsoft, I think, it didn't have a lobbying agency until they started being attacked. But the same with cronyism. It comes from the word chronos, from the Greek time. Friends, we work with friends because we diminish transaction costs, but many times that can go against justice, against charity. So it's a very complicated topic, Michael. I think that yes, seeing the big growth of this area of government, and we need more Tim Carneys, more Peter Schweitzer, more Mark Millers, that we will describes reality without hiding it, and without hiding also the blindness that we see in some of our friends that say, hey, let's put one of my bureaucrats in charge and he will distinguish, one side from the other. So I prefer not to be the one who speaks, but I have seen a great growth in unjust inequalities that are due to this crony capitalism and this businesses with privileges, and also deserves to be studied. All inequalities, I think we have to be concerned, because even again, some are not unjust, but we should try to diminish them. But the ones that are due to us, 3/4 of the world, Tim and Michael know this data, doesn't have rule of law. So to defend the wealth distribution that comes out of a world economy, or 3/4 of the world, according to world justice indices or any other indices, barely can achieve the degree of rule of law. It's not something that we should embark on. But again, we have to be prudent and continue to do great work as the one that Tim and Michael does. Let me see if there's another question. But I don't, again, we're almost reaching an hour. Tim and Michael, any final words, or Edgardo, to this debate?
I'll say,
Timothy, please.
So, I mean, first of all, the problem of resisting the pressure of the sort of cronies or their lobbyists, it really takes very strong institutions that establish themselves and plant themselves very firmly as not being susceptible to that. Establish somebody who might expect someone else to, bend to a donation will say, well, no, these guys, we know what they're about. We'll give them money. They'll be a pain in the butt, but eventually, but we know that they're not the kind that budgets. And again, it takes institutions. It takes multiple checks, and AI has been an institution like that. But I've known, sadly, a lot of smaller think tanks, because they're dependent on one donor, who haven't had that sort of courage. But also then the gray areas, which sadly we didn't get to, but somebody who says, well, this is a corrupt game. Am I not supposed to play it? And there aren't easy answers on that one, but I do think I sometimes draw a line of saying, okay, if there's a subsidy that's there for you to take for everybody, corporate welfare, you might have to take. I get a subsidy because I deduct my mortgage, right? That shouldn't happen, but my home price went up because of it. So I'm benefiting from crony capitalism. But when it comes up, I lobby against it in multiple columns a week. I say, I shouldn't get this subsidy. Nobody should. So that's sort of, there are ways to draw these lines. It's not always easy, but it's basically, do not lobby for special favors for yourself or for your industry is one of the lines I draw. And it's great to the degree that a business would actually be curious. I want to be an ethical business, pursue profit in the right way, defend free enterprise while not unilaterally disarming. That's a great conversation for academics, for journalists, for think tanks to have with these businesses.
Michael,
yeah, just yes. I mentioned this before. I'm sorry if I don't know how much you heard, but I think I agree with Tim. I think, there's this corporate social responsibility movement, but really there's a corporate moral and social responsibility not to lobby for special advantages for yourself, because that is to protect, as I said, low barriers to entry, because you're thinking generationally as opposed to thinking simply for short term. I also think, and I'm still kind of wrestling with this, but it seems to me what we're seeing across the board in culture, in Europe, in the United States, Latin America, Africa, but especially in Europe and the United States, is a decreasing concern for rule of law. That rule of law really just doesn't matter. That what matters is being practical. And I think, in a sense, I think there needs to be this cultural shift where rule of law actually matters, where like I like how you said, if there's a subsidy that applies to everybody, okay, maybe it's a bad subsidy, but at least it's kind of applying to everybody and it's rule of law and everybody has access to it. And then you work to change it. But I think ultimately, Alex's point, I mean, cronyism is a breakdown of rule of law. It means that the laws do not apply equally to other people. And when I sometimes shock people when I talk about free exchange, like why it matters. And one of the reasons I say is because when an economy is highly regulated, poor people lack the economic and political context to navigate the system. And those people who have the context navigate them. And this was a classic Latin American problem, as those of you in Argentina know. But now it's a classic American, US problem, right? It's a classic European problem. And it really is a breakdown and a disregard of rule of law. And I think here's the problem, that when the elites, the well-connected, the wealthy, don't respect rule of law, it trickles down. It's trickle down bad culture where now poor people are like, forget it, I'm not respecting rule of law either, because rich people don't respect rule of law. And then we start to have a social breakdown that's really serious. And so I think, I think really there's a deep moral responsibility in businesses. And I think, to say it maybe harshly, it's a scandal that Jamie Dimon would say, this is great for our company, when it's actually bad for America, it's bad for poor people, it's bad for rule of law, it's bad for the economy broadly, and it's bad for civil society. It's a scandal that he's still like a highly respected businessman. And I think, so the cultural, like Tim referred to the deep cultural problems that can't necessarily immediately be fixed by policy. I think this is one of them.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. Thank you so much, Tim and Edgardo and Matias, for the work of UCEMA. It all boils down to what each of us will be doing in the future. And this, again, those of you who are watching this and those of you who are watching the recording in one of your classes, the founder of an organization that I led for almost quarter a century, Atlas, Anthony Fisher, used to say, as you can see, it's not right or left, it's right or wrong. And both Tim
right.
Carney and Michael Miller, you'll go beyond ideologies. Please, thank you so much, for this commitment. We need to build these communities of support that will continue to try to win consensus for this rule of law that, as Michael says, and I agree, is being neglected, and we all agree it's needed so much because it's really the master key for economic development. Edgardo, can you close? And just let me say that hopefully next year, the first Lord Acton chair will be with the former Minister of Education and former trustee of Acton, Betsy DeVos, on education reform, because it all starts, in the home and in the education. So hopefully that will be our next Lord Acton chair. But Edgardo, your final words.
It would be great. First of all, thank you, Timothy, Michael, thank you very much to be with us. Argentina is a country where corruption is every day. It is completely usual. Crony capitalism is an usual practice here. And so for us to learn to listen this sort of speech is, for instance, for me, very, very, very attractive. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alex, as usual. You manage this. It's great. We are far, but we are close. Have a nice holiday season. We'll see you next year. The best for all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Matias, please, you can close it. As
Thank you.
usual.
Thank you, Edgardo. Thank you,
No,
Tim,
thank you.
and Michael and Alex as well for your intervention. And we wait all of you again in 2022. Muchas gracias a todos por haberse conectado y los esperamos el año que viene para unas nuevas intervenciones y presentaciones en el marco de la cátedra Lord Acton en UCEMA. Gracias a todos.
Muchas gracias. Bye bye, Michael, Timothy, Alex. Bye bye, and have a nice Christmas.
Adios.
Bye bye.